Operation Overlord, the Airborne Troops, a four-part series about the paratroopers and glider soldiers of the United States, Canada, Britain, and France on June 6, 1944. Episode 2, Equipment, Clothing, and Weapons, what the paratroopers carried into Normandy. A paratrooper did not just jump out of a plane with a rifle and a helmet. He often carried more than his own body weight in gear: ammunition, explosives, radios, food, water, medical supplies, a folding shovel, a compass, a map sewn into the lining of his jacket. Sometimes even pigeons in small wicker baskets for sending messages back to England. When the parachute opened, the force could nearly rip the boots off a man's feet. Some soldiers later described the shock as feeling like being hit by a truck, and everything he carried had to be perfect for this one mission. The airborne troops were a new kind of soldier. They fought without tanks behind them, without artillery in range, often without resupply for days. Everything they needed had to fall from the plane with them, or land in containers nearby that they would have to find in the dark. That is why a completely new world of equipment was developed for them. Special boots that could absorb the shock of landing, special helmets that wouldn't fly off in the wind, special weapons that could be folded down to fit through a narrow door, tools that could be carried on the body without snagging on the parachute lines. Some inventions were brilliant and are still used in modified form today. Some were improvised in workshops near the airfields, and some only proved themselves under fire when there was no time to test anything further. Part 1. The Americans. The famous M1942. Uniform and the Garand. The American paratroopers wore a uniform designed specifically for their role. The M1942 jumpsuit, a jacket and trousers made of sturdy cotton fitted with large angled pockets on the chest and thighs. These pockets held maps, ammunition, grenades, bandages, rations, and small personal items. The angle of the pockets was important. It meant a man could reach his gear even when crouched or lying down. On their heads they wore the M1C helmet, a version of the standard helmet with an extra chin strap. That strap had a small leather cup that fit under the chin. It was meant to keep the helmet on during the rough landing. Earlier versions had lost too many helmets when the parachute opened. On their feet were the famous Corcoran jump boots, tall, laced leather boots that supported the ankle. For many men, these boots became a symbol. If you wore them, you belonged to the Airborne. Some men polished them until they could see their reflection. Others wore them so often that the leather molded perfectly to their feet. Their main weapon was the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic rifle that fired faster than the German carbines. The Garand could put 8 rounds downrange in seconds, and that advantage mattered in close fighting. Some men carried the shorter M1A1 carbine with a folding stock, which fit better inside the tight space of a plane and was easier to handle in tight spots like trenches or hedgerows. Alongside these came the Thompson submachine gun, the famous Tommy gun, as well as Colt M1911 pistols, fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, and detonation cord wrapped around the waist or stuffed into pouches. One special invention was the leg bag, a pouch strapped to the leg that could be lowered on a 20-foot line during the jump. That way the soldier didn't have to land with the full load on his body. In theory, it worked beautifully. In practice, many leg bags tore loose during the violent opening shock and disappeared into the night, taking radios and ammunition with them. Other small inventions made a difference. Toggle ropes for climbing walls, crickets, small brass clickers that made a sound like an insect, used to recognize friend from foe in the dark. 2 clicks for friend, 1 click for danger. It sounds simple, but in the chaos of a night drop, it saved lives. Part 2. The British. Denison Smock and Sten gun. The British paratroopers had a style all their own. Over their uniform, they wore the Denison Smock, a camouflage jacket with large pockets and a distinctive pattern of brown, green, and sand tones. The smock pulled over the head like a pullover and had a tail that buttoned between the legs to keep it from flying up during the jump. It became so famous that other armies still used versions of it decades later. On their heads sat the helmet, steel, airborne troop. On their heads sat the helmet, steel, airborne troop. A flatter, rounder helmet without a rim, so the wind couldn't catch it during the jump. It was held in place by a thick chin strap and a rubber-edged liner that absorbed shock. On their feet, they wore ammunition boots with special gaiters that wrapped tightly around the lower leg. Their main weapon was often the Sten gun, a simple, cheap submachine gun that looked as if it had been welded together from pipes. In fact, that's pretty much what it was. But it was light, compact, and could fire German 9mm ammunition if British supplies ran out. The Sten had its problems. It could jam at the worst moments. It could fire by accident if dropped. But the men learned to live with its quirks because it was easy to carry and easy to replace. Alongside it came the Lee Enfield rifle in a shorter version, as well as the Bren gun, a light machine gun that many soldiers regarded as one of the best weapons of its time. The Bren was accurate, reliable, and could be carried by a single man. Each section had at least one, and the gunner was often the most respected man in the group. The British also carried a wide range of specialized tools: plastic explosives, time pencils for delayed charges. Folding bicycles, believe it or not, were dropped in containers so that small units could move quickly along country roads after landing. Most of these bicycles were abandoned within hours, but some men actually used them to reach their objectives. A true British invention was the equipment container drop. Heavy weapons, ammunition, and radios were dropped in color-coded containers. Red for ammunition, blue for rations, yellow for medical supplies, white for general gear. The men had to find these containers in the dark, often in fields covered with hedgerows, and distribute the contents quickly before the enemy arrived. Part 3. The Canadians. British equipped, Canadian touched. The Canadians were mostly equipped in the British style. They wore the Denison Smock, British helmets, British weapons. But they had their own badges, their own shoulder patches, and their own identity. The maple leaf appeared on small details all over their kit, a quiet reminder of who they were and where they came from. One thing that set them apart was their use of knives and close combat weapons. Many Canadians carried the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, a slim dagger originally developed by 2 British policemen in Shanghai. It was designed for one purpose only: silent, close killing. In the close fighting among the hedgerows and ditches of Normandy, this weapon would prove very useful. Their personal kit was also adapted. The Canadians often carried small extras: chocolate from home, sometimes wrapped in waxed paper to keep it dry; warm woolen socks for the cold nights, often hand-knitted by women back in Canada and sent through the Army Postal Service; tobacco, which was worth its weight in gold as trade goods among soldiers. Some men even carried small books, prayer cards, or photographs. Canadian medical kits were slightly larger than the British standard. Their medics were known for being well-prepared and carrying extra morphine, extra bandages, and improvised splints. Communications gear was a constant challenge. The Canadians carried Type 18 wireless sets, bulky radios that had to be strapped to the back. Many of these radios were lost or smashed on landing, and entire companies had to operate without contact for hours. Single soldiers sent on foot through enemy territory to deliver messages by hand. Part 4. The French, British gear with their own soul. The French SAS paratroopers wore British uniforms, used British weapons, and jumped with British parachutes. They had become a small unit within the British Armed Forces, supplied through British channels and trained to British standards. But they had a sign of their own: the Cross of Lorraine, the symbol of Free France. It appeared on their badges, on their helmets, sometimes even scratched into their boots or the wooden grips of their pistols. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It told every Frenchman who saw it that they were still in the war. Their equipment was geared heavily towards sabotage: plastic explosives shaped to fit into pockets, time fuses that could delay an explosion by hours, specialized tools for destroying rails, telephone poles, and bridge supports, wire cutters, crowbars, small saws that could cut through steel cables. They often carried less ammunition than other units and more gear for their particular kind of war. A French SAS trooper might land with only 60 rounds for his weapon, but with 3 kilos of plastic explosive strapped to his chest. The math was simple. They weren't going to fight pitched battles. They were going to make the enemy bleed slowly, over weeks and months. And they had something no other unit had: the language, and the land. The moment they hit the ground, they could speak with locals, find hideouts, and gather information that no other Allied soldier could obtain. A French farmer who would shoot at a stranger in his barn might offer bread and wine to a man who spoke his own dialect. The equipment of the airborne troops was a mirror of their mission. Light enough to jump from a plane, tough enough to last days without resupply, practical enough to work in the dark, in the rain, in the chaos of a scattered landing. But equipment alone doesn't win battles. A rifle is just a piece of metal until a soldier picks it up. A radio is just dead weight until someone uses it to call for help. A bridge is just a structure until men decide whether to defend it or destroy it. What these men really needed was a plan, a mission, a strategy that would make the impossible possible. They had it. Each nation had its own assignment, drawn up over months by planners working in secret rooms in London and Washington. What went according to plan, and what had to be improvised at the very last moment. That's the focus of the next episode.